I'm Eleanor Vance, 36 years old. And 2 weeks ago, I attended my sister Genevieve's engagement party, the one where they spelled my name wrong on the invitation and seated me next to the caterers. I've spent 2 decades serving my country, led missions that saved lives, and held a rank they never bothered to learn. That night, as I poured drinks for guests who thought I worked there, someone stood up, a colonel. He saluted me and called me general. The room went silent. My family, who'd spent years erasing me, had no choice but to finally see me. Before I share what happened next, let me know where you're tuning in from. And if you've ever been made to feel invisible in your own family, like this story, subscribe and stay with me. This reckoning has been a long time coming. Ever since I was a child, I had been an observer. My sister Genevieve was a whirlwind of grace and talent. With her golden hair and radiant smile, she was born to own the stage. My father, Arthur Vance, a successful businessman, always looked at Genevieve with eyes full of pride. She was the perfect extension of his image. As for me, Eleanor, I was different. I lived in books, in strategy games, in dreams of faraway places. I wasn't loud, I didn't seek attention. And that, I think, was the problem. My birth mother, she was a gentle woman, full of love, so different from the atmosphere that filled the house later on. She gave me a silver bracelet for my 12th birthday, something simple, not too expensive, but it carried a sense of safety and love that I couldn't explain. I wore it every day. Then one day, it disappeared at summer camp. I cried for 3 days straight, convinced someone had taken it, or worse, thrown it into the woods. No one searched, no one asked. My father just said, "Probably lost it in the woods, Eleanor. Let it go." But I never let it go. That bracelet and the way it vanished became a scar, a silent reminder of what had been taken and what no one cared to find. Genevieve and I grew up in the same big house in the suburbs, but we lived in entirely different worlds. While Genevieve thrived with social activities and impressive academic achievements, I spent my time in the library, immersed in military history and strategy. From a very young age, I was drawn to the idea of service, of being part of something greater than myself. It was a quiet path, not glamorous, entirely opposite from the one Genevieve had chosen and the one my family encouraged. I remember telling my father about my dream of joining the military when I was still in high school. He simply looked at me over his glasses, his tone flat, without a hint of emotion. "A smart girl like you wouldn't survive in the real world, Eleanor," he said. "The military? That's no place for you." Those words, cold and full of judgment, stayed with me for years. They didn't discourage me. On the contrary, they strengthened my resolve. I wasn't just going to survive. I was going to thrive. When I received my officer's commission, my family wasn't there. Genevieve had a wine tasting that weekend, and my father, as always, followed her lead. There were no apologies, no explanations, just absence. It should have been enough to sever any remaining ties. I told myself it didn't matter anymore, but it did. The knot they had tied wasn't around them. It was around me. I could still feel it, a persistent pull in my chest. Even so, I devoted my life to the military, achieving things they couldn't begin to imagine. While Genevieve told her friends I just did admin work in the army, as if I were merely a secretary, I had just cracked a cyber infiltration that could have disabled 2 drones midair the week before. The gap between their perception and my reality was a chasm, but I was used to being underestimated. That's how they kept their version of me alive. A quiet, harmless Eleanor, easy to overlook. The invitation to Genevieve's engagement party came as no surprise. Miss Eleanor Vance. They even spelled my name wrong. It wasn't the incorrect title, Miss instead of General or Colonel, that bothered me the most. It was the font. A swirling gold-foiled typeface, mass-produced like a sympathy card from a grocery store. The kind of card that doesn't know who it's for, only that it's supposed to be sent. I stood in the kitchen, boots still laced from my morning workout, staring at the envelope as if it could apologize. It didn't. I flipped it over. No note, just the initials G and R, Genevieve and Ryan, as if those letters alone justified the grandeur of it all. I opened it carefully, not out of sentiment, but out of habit. That's what we were taught. Never rip anything unless you know what's inside. The card inside was thick enough to stop a bullet, embossed with an illustration of a vineyard in Sonoma. Genevieve's engagement party, of course. I read the details 3 times, then once more, just to confirm. Saturday, 5:00 p.m. at the family estate. Dress code, formal garden attire, and underneath, in delicate script, we can't wait to celebrate with all the people who matter most. All the people who matter most. The room around me was silent, just the ticking of the clock and the low hum of the refrigerator. No scent of perfume, no burning candles, just laundry detergent and dried sweat from the morning workout. I picked up my phone from the counter and called Olivia. She answered on the first ring. "I got it," I said. There was a pause. "Did they get your name wrong again?" "Yeah," a longer pause. "They didn't forget. They erased." I exhaled, a breath so heavy it pressed into my ribs like a protest. Olivia continued, her voice softer. "You don't owe them anything, Eleanor. I know. I really know. You gave them 20 years of silence. That's more than they ever gave you." I sat on the edge of the counter stool, laying the envelope beside a stack of mission files. It looked so out of place, like a peacock in a war room. I told Olivia. Genevieve once told a colleague, she just does admin work in the military. Like I just file invoices or something. Last week I decrypted a cyber attack that could have disabled 2 drones midair. Olivia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "She lives in a world where truth isn't profitable. You're a threat to her image." I closed my eyes. The truth is, I had told myself this wouldn't matter anymore. That their absence from my commissioning ceremony, because Genevieve had a wine tasting that weekend, had severed any remaining ties. But it hadn't, because the knot they tied wasn't around them. It was around me. I stood up and opened the closet next to the kitchen. My uniform hung exactly as I'd left it. Neatly pressed, ready. The insignia on the chest caught the kitchen light. I ran my hand over the fabric, that familiar, weighty calm settling over me. It had seen deserts, storms, pain, and it had never failed me. But they didn't deserve to see me in that uniform. They didn't deserve to claim any part of what that uniform had earned. I folded it slowly, carefully, with the respect it deserved, placed it back into the closet, then turned to the drawer and took out a civilian dress, plain navy blue, form-fitting, understated, no medals, no rank, just presence. And that would be enough. My phone buzzed. A message from Olivia. "She seated you next to the waitstaff again." Of course she had. I smiled. Not with bitterness, but with something colder, sharper. I grabbed my coat, keys, and the envelope. As I walked toward the door, I whispered into the still air, "Let them underestimate me. They always do." I arrived before the guests, but somehow they had already made me invisible. The entryway was deserted when I pulled in. No luxury SUVs in sight. Just rows of lavender bushes trimmed down to the millimeter for symmetry. The house stood there like a photograph, flawless from a distance, sterile up close. Genevieve's Boston estate had always felt more like a stage set than a home, designed to impress, arranged to control. Every hedge knew its place better than I did. I rang the bell once. The chime was crisp, hollow, a sound meant to echo, not to welcome. Evelyn answered the door. Her silk blouse shimmered like armor, and her smile looked airbrushed onto her cheekbones. "You made it," she said. Her voice as smooth as the rose she already had in hand. "Brave of you." As if I were stepping into a war zone and not my sister's house. Maybe in some way, I was. "I'm early," I said, keeping my tone even. Didn't want to miss anything. She stepped aside. "Ah, the florist's late. Maybe you can help Genevieve with the centerpieces." I nodded once, automatically. No surprise there. The foyer was filled with gleaming marble and fresh hydrangeas. A framed photo of Genevieve and Ryan sat on the entry table. Their smiles were polished. Her hand rested gently on his chest like a campaign poster for upscale love. Beneath it, a small sign. "Gratitude is the hallmark of grace." Genevieve must have bought it after her gratitude campaign went viral. "She's in the sunroom," Evelyn added, already walking away. The sunroom smelled like eucalyptus and subtle manipulation. Genevieve sat in a high-backed chair, one hand holding her phone, the other a lavender ribbon. "Eleanor," she said without looking up, "you're here." I gave a polite smile. "Wouldn't miss it." She gestured toward a list on the table. "Your room's next to the garage. It's a bit tight, but we saved the better suites for out-of-town guests. You understand." "I always do," I said. "Ryan's parents are flying in this afternoon. We gave them the East Wing." "The East Wing, of course." I wondered what that made my area, the loading dock. She finally looked up. Her eyes flicked over me like I was a checklist item she'd now completed. That dress is appropriate. That's what the tag said, I replied. She didn't laugh, just turned back to her ribbons. Guests began arriving shortly after. The doorbell became a gauge of social escalation. Evelyn floated through the house, air kissing and tapping wrists, handing out compliments like bribes. Genevieve adjusted her posture and turned up the warmth, her voice slipping into PR mode. Someone handed me a tray of glassware. Can you take these out to the back table? No one asked if my hands were free. No one noticed I wasn't staff. By the time the second wave of guests arrived, my job had expanded to coordinating napkin colors. Genevieve hadn't assigned the task, but when no one else moved, I did. That's how I became useful, by noticing what others ignored. At one point, Evelyn introduced me to a couple from the vineyard. This is Eleanor, she said with a condescending tone. She does admin work for the government. I raised an eyebrow. Strategic operations. The woman blinked. Oh, like files? Mission logistics briefing files. But yes, files, I added. They nodded slowly, politely. I was the paperclip in a room full of diamonds. Genevieve arrived moments later. Her voice was sweet, her smile weaponized. Eleanor handles files and reports, she said, waving vaguely. But important ones, of course. I kept my smile steady. I'd heard all of this before. In high school, she told her friends I did something with spreadsheets and secrets. As if I were a glorified secretary for the CIA. Across the room, I saw a woman point her phone in my direction. The screen lit up, camera focused. A second later, she lowered it and tapped twice. Delete. I wasn't worth saving. I didn't move, didn't react. Just sipped my soda and shifted a vest half an inch. They wanted me to be decor, silent, easily cropped out. But I knew better. Because furniture doesn't observe, furniture doesn't remember, and furniture doesn't build strategy while holding a centerpiece tray. The woman with the phone looked up and met my gaze. She flinched slightly, then turned away. It was a small victory, but I'd take it. Because while they were posing for pictures, I was positioning myself. And one day, they'll realize I was in the frame the whole time, just blurred out by their own design. In Genevieve's graduation photo, I was nothing more than a shoulder and a lock of hair. The rest had been cropped out, as if I'd never truly belonged. I stood in the upstairs hallway, alone, the soft creak of old floorboards beneath me the only sound accompanying my steps. The air held the faint scent of lemon oil and expensive neglect. Along the wall stretched a collection of victories, floor to ceiling, a curated history encased in gilded frames. Genevieve with her valedictorian sash. Genevieve cutting the ribbon at her first half-marathon. Genevieve at the podium, hand raised mid-speech, as if she had been born to be applauded. And then, halfway through, I found it. Her college graduation photo, Harvard, of course. The camera had captured her in the center, glowing in crimson and black, tossing her cap with theatrical flair. To her left, my father beamed. One arm around her, the other raised in a proud salute. Evelyn stood to the right, chin lifted, wearing a graceful smile. And behind them, almost invisible, cropped tightly, either by accident or by design, was half of a shoulder, a brown lock of hair. Me. I leaned in, as if squinting could bring the missing part of me back into the frame. But it was gone, as always. I hadn't been asked to be in the photo. I'd arrived late, literally and figuratively. I had just returned from a training cycle at Fort Gordon, a red-eye flight. No makeup, boots still dusty. I remember thinking, at least I made it. At the time, that had felt like enough, but it never was. My fingers brushed the edge of the frame, and something in me ached. A memory I hadn't touched in years rose up again. A silver bracelet, a birthday gift from my birth mother, the real one, the one before Evelyn. I had worn it every day until it disappeared at summer camp, the year I turned 12. I cried for 3 days, convinced someone had taken it, or worse, thrown it away. No one searched, no one asked. Probably lost it in the woods, Eleanor, my father had said. Let it go. But I never did. I walked slowly toward the guest room, the one they'd assigned me near the garage. The closet was nearly empty, except for a drawer that stuck a little as I pulled it open. Inside was a clutter of forgotten things. Leftover ribbons, a cracked comb, old Christmas cards, a few half-melted wax sachets. And there it was, tucked into a wrinkled cloth napkin, The bracelet. Tarnished, slightly bent at the clasp, but unmistakably mine. I held my breath. I reached for it with fingers I hadn't realized were trembling. The metal was cold and familiar. My name was still faintly engraved on the inside, though the letters had worn down with time. They hadn't thrown it away. They had just hidden it. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at it. The years poured through me, folding into a dull, heavy ache. Not anger, not yet. Something softer, sadder, a confirmation of something I'd always known but never said aloud. They didn't throw it away, I whispered, voice catching. They just hid it. Behind me, soft voices echoed down the hallway. Laughter rose from the staircase, as if the party below were happening in an entirely separate reality. A reality where I didn't exist, or had never existed. I slipped the bracelet into my pocket and stood up. Something in the corner of the closet caught my eye. A small cardboard box labeled in thick black Sharpie. Eleanor's old stuff. The word hit harder than I expected. I knelt down and opened it. Inside was a faded pencil sketch I'd drawn at 15. A woman in uniform, faceless but standing with posture like steel. A music medal I'd won in 8th grade still tied with a red ribbon, and at the bottom, neatly folded, a sheet of paper torn from a yellow notepad. I opened it. It was a draft, a field report I never submitted, early training simulation data annotated in blue ink. My ink. I remembered this. I had written it after a 36-hour shift. Then decided it was too rough, not good enough to turn in. Somehow, it ended up here. They had kept it. Or maybe, once again, they had simply never bothered to throw it away. I sank to the floor, the bracelet now heavy in my pocket, the field report in my hands. There was nothing dramatic here. No yelling, no slammed doors. Just small, deliberate acts of erasure. Cropped photos, misplaced belongings, labels written in Sharpie. Not hatred, just management, control, enforced silence. I folded the paper and placed it back in the box. A breeze whispered through the window, as if trying to remind me that something else was waiting. And it was, because somewhere inside this house, beneath carefully placed lighting, I was starting to find shadows they hadn't fully hidden. I'd once led command rooms with satellite feeds and classified strike orders. Tonight, I was topping off Chardonnay. Glasses chimed softly as I moved through carefully curated clusters of guests, their laughter bubbling like the wine. My left hand gripped the bottle with practiced steadiness. The same hand that had traced evacuation routes through Kandahar now tipped to refill Mrs. Harrison's glass as she giggled about imported orchids on the mantel. Genevieve's main hall was drenched in golden hour light, diffused through sheer curtains. The palette of yellows and creams, along with carefully arranged hydrangeas, transformed the room into a lifestyle magazine spread. A string quartet played near the fireplace, just quiet enough to suggest wealth, just loud enough to mask the subtler discomforts. Champagne towers shimmered like threats. I wore navy again, civilian clothes, no jewelry, deliberately muted. Evelyn passed by me, trailing peony perfume and a tray of hors d'oeuvres. She didn't say thank you, just nudged the tray closer and murmured, "They're running low near the patio. You're good at organizing." Organizing. I nodded once and followed the directive. To them, my logistics skills weren't a sign of strategic thinking. They were domestic, deferential. Genevieve once told a friend, right in front of me, "Eleanor likes orders. She was born to serve, not to lead." And yet here I was, orchestrating the efficient movement of snacks through enemy territory. From across the room, I saw Olivia. Just a flash. Her hair darker than it is now, pulled tight, standing near the entrance. Her eyes met mine for a fraction of a second, and I saw it. The tension she carried for me. She lifted her glass in the smallest gesture. I gave a nod in return. We wouldn't speak tonight, not yet. A new wave of applause swept through the room like a choreographed tide. Genevieve stood at the center, radiant in her pale blue silk dress, holding Ryan's hand as if he were both her prize and her proclamation. "And here he is," she beamed. "Ryan O'Connell, admired, beloved, perfect." Laughter and the clink of glasses followed. Evelyn dabbed at her eyes with a cloth napkin, as if the moment were too overwhelming for dry tears. Ryan smiled modestly, shook hands, accepted praise. He looked polished, yes, but not soft. His posture carried the military sharpness, even at rest. And then his eyes moved. He found me. He politely excused himself and walked toward the refreshment table, toward me. I adjusted the wine bottle in my hand and angled slightly, ready to pour another glass. But he didn't reach for one. He stopped 2 feet away. We stood in the center of luxury, our eyes locked. No smile, no question, just silence. I didn't flinch. He looked at me with a kind of deliberate calculation, not confusion, not suspicion, recognition. And it didn't feel new. It felt remembered. Then Genevieve appeared beside him, slipping her arm through his. "Oh," she said with her usual disdain. "Don't mind her. She's been a little strange lately." I didn't move. Neither did Ryan. Genevieve gently tugged at his sleeve. He blinked, turned away, and let her guide him back into the circle of admirers. But just before they disappeared, he paused, glanced back, and said just loud enough for only me to hear, a soft murmur laced with something almost reverent, "Vance." In a house that had buried every trace of me, they had somehow kept the one thing that proved I existed. The attic door groaned as if it hadn't been touched in years. Dust curled through slants of pale light streaming from a narrow window. The air smelled of forgotten summers, cedar chests, old wool, a perfume bottle long since dried up. I climbed slowly, the field report tucked under my arm like a relic. The box labeled Eleanor's old stuff had been shoved behind Christmas decorations and Genevieve's childhood trophy boxes. And there, beneath a stack of outdated technical manuals and a cracked violin case, I found it. The report, a single copy, my handwriting precise, controlled, dated, and stamped. Operation Cold Moon, draft copy, Vance. I didn't remember keeping a physical version. I didn't remember leaving it behind. But then again, what else had they quietly cataloged while pretending I didn't exist? I crouched beside an old chest and opened the first page. My notes stretched margin to margin, jammed radio transmissions, satellite coordination markers, risk assessment models. I could almost feel the desert heat radiating through the paper. My fingers traced the edge as if the touch alone could help me breathe. And then I saw it. Near the bottom of page 3, written in red ink, "This saved us." Who had written it? I froze. The handwriting was sharp, slanted, disciplined, but fast. Like someone thinking too quickly to write neatly. I knew that handwriting. I had seen it on training rosters, mission reports, strategic notes, scribbled on dry erase boards. Ryan O'Connell. He had read it. Not just read, it. He had annotated it, respected it, sought out the author. I sank to the floor. The silence of the attic wrapped around me. This place wasn't empty. It was full of everything they hadn't said, everything they had quietly kept. The pages fluttered beneath my hands, but I didn't turn them. My eyes stung not from tears, but from something deeper, recognition. I wasn't just a name on a draft. I was the ghost in the machine, the whisper in their headset that helped them survive. And he remembered. My breath slowed, my heart did not. The memory hit like a sudden punch, the night I wrote that report. A tent on the edge of Kandahar, 2 a.m. My back hunched over a satellite feed. Everyone else asleep, or too angry to speak. We had lost 3 in an ambush. I blamed myself for decoding too late, for hesitating, for not flagging a phrase buried in a jammed message. I wrote that report in a haze of failure. I never intended to submit it. But I needed to record the mistake, to take responsibility for the loss. And then I didn't submit it. I folded it, shoved it into my pack. Olivia found it a week later. She held it up to the light and said, "Even ghosts leave footprints, Eleanor. That report was yours, whether you thought you deserved it or not." At the time, I brushed her off. Now, in this attic, with Ryan's handwriting staring back at me, I knew she'd been right. Voices rose from below, the clinking of glasses, laughter. Someone called out, "Sir, we're ready for your toast, Ryan." He was looking for someone. I slowly closed the file, my hand still clutching it tight against my chest. Its weight pressed under my collarbone, heavier than usual, more real than anything else this house had ever held. My voice broke the silence, so soft even I barely heard it. He knows. He had once signed his name to a mission he almost didn't survive. Tonight, he signed a name beneath my field report. The reading room was dim, nestled between the doors to the garden and the sunken library Genevieve had remodeled last fall. It wasn't meant for guests, but Ryan wasn't a guest anymore. He was family, or so they said. He gently shut the door, cutting off the fading laughter and clinking silverware. The party was thinning. The champagne had gone flat. A soft jazz tune, likely classical, still drifted through the house speakers. It sounded like a lie pretending to be calm. He placed a folder on the table, leather-bound, standard military issue. Inside were old NATO summaries, wrinkled mission maps, a page yellowed at the corners. He flipped through them carefully, but with urgency in every movement. Then he found a loose page tucked between reports. The ink had faded but remained legible. Field notes, unnamed lines underlined in red. Satellite logic, terrain overlay. Codename at the top, Operation Cold Moon. His hand paused. He pulled a separate sheet from his inner jacket pocket. The page from the attic, the draft by Eleanor. He laid them side by side. The handwriting matched, not just in shape but in rhythm. The way the letter R curved slightly to the left, the zeros written closed and tight like a command. He had seen thousands of memos, dozens of hands, but this one had haunted him. For 5 years he had carried that annotated page. He had once asked quietly if anyone knew who wrote it. No one knew, or claimed not to. It's just a report, they'd said. Another anonymous summary that happened to be right. Except it wasn't just right. It had saved 2 squads from a misdrop, including his own. He took out his phone and stepped into the corner of the room, shielding the screen from the flickering light. He scrolled to a name and tapped. Olivia picked up on the 3rd ring. "I'm at the house," he said without greeting. "I figured," she replied. "I found the report, hers. That's her handwriting. It's always been hers, hasn't it?" There was a pause, the kind you take when you inhale before walking into fire. "Yes," Olivia said. "That report saved 2 squads, including yours." He exhaled, a sound like something lifting or breaking. She never said a word. "She didn't have to," Olivia said, "but maybe you do." He ended the call without goodbye. Downstairs, the house still hummed with the artificial energy of a party, pretending it wasn't over. People posed by the floral arch installed for photos. Genevieve took center stage without needing to be asked. Evelyn adjusted the train of her gown. My father smoothed his tie, his face blank with rehearsed pride. Eleanor stood to the side, near the edge of the frame, not fully in, not fully out. Ryan slowly walked closer, without saying a word. His mere presence bent the space around him. People instinctively stepped aside without realizing it. He didn't speak to her, didn't signal. He just stood near as the camera shutter clicked continuously. A silent disruption, a truth too large to ignore. The photographer asked for a smile. Ryan didn't smile. Eleanor turned slightly, sensing him but not moving. When the photo session ended, the crowd began to scatter, to cake, to whiskey, to the exit. He stepped in closer, carefully. She didn't register him at first. Then the soft press of a folded paper against the pocket of her blazer. Gentle, deliberate. He leaned in, voice low enough to slip past her defenses. "In case you forget who you are." And then he was gone. No fanfare, no applause, just clarity. They raised glasses to Genevieve's career, my father's golf score, even the new drapes. They skipped over the woman who saved a base from being bombed. The formal dining room sparkled with effort. Velvet curtains framed the towering windows like gowns waiting to move. Crystal chandeliers shimmered over a long mahogany table, polished so smooth I could see the reflection of my clenched jaw. Around me, wine glasses were aligned in symmetrical rows. Butter-soft lamb chops were paired with heirloom carrots braised to perfection, surface-level perfection. Genevieve stood first, glass in hand, the room falling silent on cue. Her smile might have seemed warm if you didn't know how carefully it was built. "I want to thank all of you," she began, "for joining us tonight. It's been a year of incredible achievements. Mom's foundation exceeded its fundraising goal. Dad finally broke 90 on the golf course. Laughter followed, genuine. And of course," she added, pausing for effect, "we closed our Series C round, so next quarter the company will expand to Geneva. It's truly an honor." There was applause, light, elegant. I sipped my wine. I couldn't taste it. "And none of this," she continued, "would be possible without this family." She placed her hand on Evelyn's shoulder. Evelyn beamed as though she'd been blessed. Ryan sat silently beside her, his expression unreadable. Then it was my father's turn. He rose slowly, a little too proud, lifting his glass. "And let's not forget Eleanor," he said, his tone as indifferent as someone remembering to thank the florist. "Always quiet, good with numbers." A few polite nods followed. Then someone, a woman in a gold pearl necklace, tilted her head and asked, "So you do admin in the military?" I turned to her. "I design operations," I said flatly. Silence followed, not shock, just disinterest. As if I'd said I alphabetize files. Someone coughed. A fork scraped across porcelain. Genevieve cleared her throat theatrically, raising her glass again. "And who knows," she said, eyes twinkling with amusement. "Maybe next year Eleanor can help coordinate the logistics for our honeymoon." Laughter rose, gentle, mocking, the kind that doesn't wound deeply, just enough to remind you not to stand up. I didn't flinch. I reached for my water glass. My hand didn't shake. And then Ryan stood up, fork still in hand, not smiling. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't list my rank. Someone else did. And the room shattered. The soft clink of silver on porcelain echoed across the hall as dessert plates were set down. Vanilla panna cotta trembled on fine china, untouched. As the guests leaned back into their chairs with satisfied comfort, laughter faded into murmurs. Candlelight softened everything except me. I sat still, back straight, hands calmly in my lap. The humiliation from moments ago still lingered like cigarette smoke. Genevieve had delivered the final blow, and the room had laughed on cue. Father had given his usual approving nod to my existence, and I, as always, had said nothing. Ryan stood. The movement was quiet, deliberate, but it sliced through the room like a shift in air pressure. He tapped his glass once with the back of his fork. The sound wasn't loud, but it still cut off the conversations. "Before we enjoy dessert," he said, voice calm but resonant, "I'd like to take a moment." Heads turned, eyebrows raised. Genevieve looked confused but smiled, ready to reclaim the spotlight. Ryan didn't smile. "I want to thank someone in this room," he continued, not looking at Genevieve, but scanning the table, letting the tension rise with every breath. "Someone who saved me, and others, someone whose work kept us alive." A nervous chuckle surfaced. Evelyn tilted her head. "Oh, Ryan," she said gently, "surely you mean Genevieve's." But he lifted a hand, silencing her. He turned. "General Vance," he said clearly, eyes locked on me. "I failed to greet you earlier. Please forgive me." And then he saluted. A sharp, perfect salute. Upright, formal, unwavering. The room didn't just fall silent, it fractured. Gasps rippled out like aftershocks. Evelyn's wineglass tilted and shattered into her plate. Genevieve's mouth parted, lips trembling in disbelief. My father dropped his fork, the clatter loud in the dead air. Someone whispered, She's a general." So. Across the room, a man in uniform, I hadn't recognized him as military, slowly stood. Then another, both men saluted at once. The world tilted. I didn't move. I held Ryan's gaze. Then slowly, I reached for my water glass, took a sip. Let the moment stretch. And finally, I said, "At ease, Colonel." My voice was even. No ceremony necessary. It was just a mission. His hand dropped, but he didn't sit. He stood in the storm he'd just created and let the silence settle. No one finished their panna cotta. The silence tasted sharper than wine. The once glorious dining room now felt overexposed, like a stage forgotten under lights after the actors had fled. Plates hovered over untouched desserts. Hands fumbled with napkins. Eyes darted like moths looking for an exit. No one spoke first. The silence wasn't just awkward, it was seismic. It shifted tectonic plates beneath every smile that had dismissed me, every toast that had excluded me. I didn't move. I let it sink in. Evelyn, seated 2 chairs to my left, leaned slightly toward Genevieve and hissed, "This wasn't in the script." Genevieve didn't answer. Her gaze stayed fixed ahead, her mouth still slightly open. A tremble in her fingers betrayed the composure she tried to hold. Ryan had sat back down, composed, his face unreadable. He said nothing else. He didn't need to. My father finally exhaled. A shaky breath, barely audible. He reached for his wine, missed, then tried again. When he finally looked at me, his eyes held no anger, no shame. They were simply empty, like a man blinking through smoke. Genevieve cleared her throat, voice thin and strained. "But Eleanor's always been shy, hasn't she?" She tried to smile, but it vanished before it could form. From the far end of the table, a voice sliced through the silence like a blade. "Sterling reporting. I served under her. She coordinated a 3-nation joint op out of Germany last year. Her projections are the reason my team made it home." The speaker was the man in the black suit, Retired, I now realized. But he still sat like command, a former general. His words landed like stones in water. My father turned to me. His voice, for the first time, held no dismissal. It wasn't rehearsed. It was small. "I didn't know," he murmured. I slowly lifted my wine glass, sipped, let the flavor settle. Then I set it down and looked at him, saying, clearly and consistently, "You never asked." The room went still again. It wasn't a rebuke, not a shout, but it echoed louder than anything I'd said in 30 years. And then, softly, deliberately, someone at the far end of the table stood and clapped, once, then twice. The applause rang out like punctuation. Another guest joined in, then another. The sound spread, at first slow, hesitant, then full. I didn't stand. I didn't bow. I just sat there, letting them reclaim their dignity the only way they knew how, by finally giving some back to me. I didn't slam the door. I didn't say goodbye. But no one called me invisible as I walked out anymore. The foyer was quiet now, no longer a stage. The party had dissolved behind those thick double doors, melting into half-finished conversations. The sound of clinking glasses now dulled by awareness. In this space, surrounded by marble floors and designer mirrors, I finally felt the absence of noise like a bomb. I slowly put on my coat, fingers brushing the lining. The report Ryan had slipped into my pocket earlier was still there, neatly folded, a symbol, a farewell, a proof that didn't need announcing. The wind whispered outside, brushing against the mansion's facade. A porch light flickered, one imperfection in the carefully arranged world Genevieve had tried to preserve. Footsteps came from behind, steady but sure. "Figured I'd find you here," Ryan said, voice low. I turned. He wasn't in uniform, not exactly. But the way he carried himself tonight, all precision and restraint, he might as well have been. In his hand was a thin folder, unsealed, no longer classified. "Just declassified," he said, handing it to me. "Original copy. Your signature's on page 9. Thought you might want it. For your next student." I took it without looking. I knew every line inside. "Thank you," I said simply. Behind him, the front door opened and Olivia stepped in. She didn't smile, didn't speak right away, just nodded once, her eyes meeting mine with the unwavering trust she always carried. "Nice play, ma'am," she said, and I could hear a hint of pride beneath her usual calm. Evelyn appeared in the hallway, then froze when she saw me. She said nothing, just stood there, a woman unsure whether to confront or retreat. Her pearl necklace was crooked, her face tight with calculations she no longer controlled. Genevieve appeared next, her hair slightly undone, makeup no longer flawless. The polished veneer had worn thin. She opened her mouth. I raised a hand. "Not tonight." She froze, and for the first time obeyed. Ryan stepped back, making room for me. Olivia stood beside me as if she belonged there, because she did. I turned to look once more into the house. The chandelier glimmered faintly in the distance, casting warped shadows. Further in, the table, the framed photos, the applause that came too late. "I don't live here," I said softly to Ryan. "I never did." Then I stepped through the door and into the night. The air was cool, crisp, almost refreshing. Olivia opened the car door, keys already in her hand. As we reached the base of the steps, she glanced at me. "Drink?" I tilted my head at her. "Whiskey's mine," she added. "Only if you let me pick the next battle." She smiled. "Deal." And we vanished into the night, not like ghosts, but as commanders of our own silence. My father once said I was a smart girl who wouldn't survive the real world. His letter began with, "Dear General Vance." The envelope sat on my desk like it didn't belong there, cream-colored, standard-sized. Addressed in that familiar, blocky handwriting, my full name written out. Not Eleanor, not Miss, not even just Eleanor. And for a long moment, I didn't touch it. The base was silent, the hum of fluorescent lights above blending with the distant bark from a drill sergeant ending the night shift. I picked up the envelope, dated 2 days after the party, postmarked from Massachusetts. No return address, but I knew the handwriting. I'd seen it in the margins of forgotten school permission slips and sticky notes on the fridge that always ended with "Don't touch my tools." Inside was a single folded page. "Dear General Vance." The words looked strange in his handwriting, as if someone else had guided the pen. I read slowly, eyes tracing every hesitant loop. "I don't know how to start. Maybe I should have said something sooner. Maybe I should have looked closer. Maybe I just didn't know what I was seeing. My fingers trembled, but I kept reading. You never made noise. That was the problem, Genevieve demanded. You adapted. I thought that meant you were fine. I didn't realize silence could mean something else. A breath caught in my throat. I set the letter down, walked away, then circled back like it had pulled me. I saw you leave that night, and for the first time, I saw you. He didn't apologize, not directly. No grand declarations, no begging, just a string of small admissions, stitched together by a man who finally recognized the shape of his own absence. I thought you wouldn't make it in the real world. Turns out it was the world that couldn't keep up with you. It ended simply. You don't have to write back. I just wanted you to know. I see you now. I folded the letter once, twice, held it in my palm. My phone buzzed. A voicemail from Olivia. I pressed play. You don't owe him a reply. Her voice said softly. Reading it is enough. Burning it is fair too. I smiled faintly. Of course she knew. I didn't respond to the voicemail. Instead, I walked to the filing cabinet and pulled a lighter from the emergency kit. The letter flared bright, then crumbled into ash in the metal bin. But one line, I cut it out before lighting the fire. He sees me now. I pinned it on the board above my desk. Right below it, I scribbled a small note and stuck it there. Let them see, but don't wait to be seen. A gentle knock. I turned around. A young sergeant stood in the doorway, uniform crisp, expression uneasy. Ma'am, she said, a request just came in from West Point. They want you to lecture. I nodded once, voice steady. Tell them I accept. Genevieve once said the bracelet looked cheap. Now she sent it back in a velvet box. No note. The mailroom was quiet, the hum of fluorescent lights like an old memory. I signed for the small parcel without thinking, expecting field equipment or another round of encryption cards. But the return address wasn't familiar. No name, just a P.O. box in Boston. I turned it over once, then again. The clerk raised an eyebrow. That's all, ma'am, I nodded, tucking the package under one arm. Snow had started to fall outside, fine like powdered sugar, the kind that doesn't stick, just brushes the ground with the idea of winter. Back in my office, I shut the door behind me, set the box on the desk, and stared at it like it might hiss. It wasn't heavy, it wasn't grand, just exact. A velvet square no bigger than my palm. I opened it slowly. Inside, nestled in deep navy velvet, was the bracelet. The silver bracelet I'd lost. No, been told I'd lost at summer camp when I was 10. A delicate thing with a small compass charm and my initials faintly etched on the clasp. I remembered Genevieve mocking it once when she saw it. Looks like something from a cereal box, she'd said. Too small for you anyway. But here it was, the charm polished, the clasp replaced. It looked cared for. No note, not even a scrap of paper with her handwriting, but I knew it was from her. The absence of words was signature enough. I picked it up carefully, turned it in my hand. It didn't fit anymore. Hadn't in years. My wrist had thickened with time, with training, with consequence, but it wasn't meant to be worn. The door creaked. Just a draft from the hallway. I set the bracelet down next to a framed tactical map from Operation Cold Moon. The same map I used in briefings. The same mission that changed everything. My phone buzzed. A message from Olivia. She sent it, brave in her own way. I stared at the screen, then back at the bracelet. Genevieve never apologized, not once. But she didn't throw it away either. I whispered, "You didn't understand, but you kept it. That counts too." The room was quiet, snow outside the window dancing in lazy swirls. I sat down, letting the silence settle around me. Then an email chimed. Subject: Guest lecture confirmation from United States Military Academy at West Point to General Eleanor Vance. Course title: Adaptive Command and Emotional Intelligence. I leaned back in the chair, fingers brushing the bracelet once more, then turned toward the future. They didn't stand for my rank. They stood because I made them reconsider what leadership meant. The oak-paneled lecture hall smelled faintly of polish and paper. The old-fashioned kind of respect clung to military academies. Rows of rigid uniforms sat alert beneath the vaulted ceiling, name tags catching the light like silent declarations. I stood at the front, not behind the podium but beside it. No podium today, no barrier. I scanned their faces, young, sharp, expectant. Most had probably Googled me. The truth, or at least the digital shards of it, had spread fast. But I wasn't here to retell headlines. I began with no introduction. No salutes, I said, holding their gaze. Save your respect for the woman beside you, the one who doubted herself but showed up anyway. The room shifted, shoulders straight but breathing easier. Olivia had driven me in earlier that morning. She didn't stay, just leaned against the car window and said, "Your battlefield, your rules." I'd nodded, feeling more exposed in dress blues than I ever had in desert fatigues. Now I clicked the remote and brought up a single slide, a heat map from Operation Cold Moon. No names, just topography lines, threat levels, and exit vectors. This, I said, is what compassion looks like when rendered as data. I didn't explain further. I let them figure it out. I walked them through the mission, not with technical terms, but with cause and cost. How one slight delay, one unnoticed hesitation in a young analyst's voice, altered a command decision. How stopping to ask why she sounded different helped strengthen a unit and saved lives. How leadership wasn't just about giving orders, but noticing the cracks before someone falls through. Midway, Cadet Price raised her hand. Her posture was textbook military, but her eyes reminded me too much of mine at 20. "What if they still don't see us, ma'am?" I paused. The room went still. "Then see each other," I said. "That's where it begins. Visibility isn't granted, it's practiced. First in here, then out there." I saw Jackson Reed, a senior cadet in the front row, shift slightly, his pen halting mid-stroke. Another slide came up. This time, no data, just a quote from a post-action review I had once rewritten myself. Maintained cohesion under fire through calm. Below it was my own note. Leadership is silence until it needs to be loud. I turned back to them. "We're trained to endure," I said, voice gentle, "but that's not the same as silence." Then I stepped away from the screen, moved toward the blackboard, picked up a stick of white chalk, letting it squeal softly against the surface as I wrote, "Visibility is not validation. Truth sought needs no spotlight." A silence, then movement. Jackson Reed stood first. No rush, no theatrics, just intent. Then Madison Price, then row by row, the entire hall rose. They didn't applaud, they didn't need to. The act of rising was enough. A recognition not of rank, but of resonance. I nodded once, placed the chalk back in the tray, and turned fully to face them. Class dismissed. For the first time in a long time, I saw myself in a frame, and I wasn't a half-shoulder. The envelope on my desk was thick and deliberate, no return address, but the handwriting was Ryan's. That sharp, intentional script always looked like it belonged more to after-action reports than birthday cards. I opened it with a letter opener, not for ceremony, just habit. Inside, wrapped in translucent tissue, was a wooden frame, simple, smooth. The kind of frame that doesn't ask for attention but quietly claims its place. The photo inside stopped me. Cadet Price and I stood together in the West Point lecture hall. She was smiling, head tilted slightly toward me, as if the universe had finally allowed her to exhale. And me, I wasn't cropped or obscured. I was centered, clear, present. Below the photo, in Ryan's tidy handwriting, "For when you forget they're seeing you now." I leaned back, letting the moment settle. The lamp on my desk cast a soft glow, catching the rim of a cold coffee cup and the open briefing files from earlier in the day. Outside, the wind pressed gently against the window pane, a reminder that the world didn't need to rush. They used to give me the smallest seat at the table. Now I build tables and teach others to do the same. The West Point Library was nearly silent. Only the sound of rain tapping softly on arched windows and the occasional creak of a chair. My laptop glowed faintly in the quiet corner I always claimed. Far enough from the shelves to think, close enough to feel history pressing down like a breath. My fingers hovered above the keys. Then I typed the final line of the manuscript. "You are not their absence. You are your own presence." I leaned back, exhaled. It wasn't a victory, not exactly. It felt more like alignment, like something cracked years ago had quietly slid into place. Outside, thunder rumbled softly beneath the rain. I reached for the jasmine tea Olivia had brought earlier, still warm. She had arrived without fanfare, carrying only a dry towel and a sly grin in her voice. Endings aren't quiet, they just pretend to be. My desk, for once, was nearly empty. Just the manuscript, a few scattered notes, and a bookmark Madison Price had handed me that morning. Olive wood, engraved in her own handwriting. For the general who never needed applause. I smiled. She hadn't stayed to explain, just slid it onto the desk during morning PT and nodded. In the same way I once nodded to Olivia years ago beneath the harsh sun of Afghanistan. Silent understanding passed down like a compass. I sipped the tea, reread the words. Not applause, presence. Olivia returned as I was sealing the envelope, thick with pages and purpose, addressed to a publisher in Manhattan. She sat across from me, resting her elbows, studying my face like I might disappear again if she blinked. "You're not just a voice anymore," she said, not smiling. "You're the silence that made others speak." I didn't respond, not because I disagreed, but because there was nothing left to prove. Outside the library, cadets passed in damp uniforms, heads bowed under the mist. A few glanced up toward the high windows. One spotted me and gave a sharp nod. Not a salute, just acknowledgement. Legacy is quieter than I imagined. The book title was simple, The Silent Directive. Subtitle, What They Forgot, I Became. I took the envelope to the outgoing box myself. Slid it in without ritual. That story now belonged to the world. On the way out, I passed the glass case listing former faculty. My name had been etched into a new plaque last week. Small, exact, undeniable. Outside, the rain fell heavier. I didn't hurry. I stepped into it. I tucked my name tag into my pocket, letting the rain touch my skin. No one called me general, but every cadet I passed met my eyes and nodded. Not because they were told to, but because they chose to. And that, at last, was enough. My phone buzzed. A message from Madison Price. "If I can be even half of you, I'll be enough." I stared at the message for a long moment, then I typed back, "You already are. Just keep showing up. They'll follow." I placed the photo frame carefully next to my battlefield medals. Not above, not below. Just beside it, a new edition, equal in weight. Legacy isn't forged solely in brass and ceremony. Sometimes it lies in silent echoes and borrowed courage. I reached for a pen, slipped a small card into the corner of the frame, and wrote a single line. Not the face in the frame, but the strength behind it. The house was quiet, the base even quieter. I opened my personal draft, the one I had stored in scattered scribbles across deployment flights and nights in the barracks. Chapter 1. The General They Tried to Forget. The cursor blinked. I didn't hesitate. They once called her forgettable. Now even silence bows to her presence. Justice does not roar. It comes like snow falling on stone, steady and undeniable, like the final note of a melody long forgotten. Justice may come late, but it echoes powerfully once heard. No wall of lies can stand forever against the tide of truth. If this story has reached you, hit like and leave a comment. Type 1 if you've ever felt overlooked but kept going. Type 2 if you believe her battle isn't over yet.